Good evening. You're watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. Sitting in for Jigmang Saysay, I'm Rod Nepomuceno. The Philippine Daily Inquirer is the leading newspaper in the country. For 20 years, it has produced some of the most thought-provoking news articles and opinion pieces, and with its current publisher, it will strive to continue doing just that. Please join me in welcoming Dean Raul Pangalangan, publisher of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Dean, good evening, sir. Thank you so much for joining us, taking the time.
Happy to be here, to be interviewed by you.
Great, great. Now, Dean, we all know PDI, Philippine Daily Inquirer. It is the #1 newspaper.
Thank you that it came from you.
Being a writer in the Philippines, but really, it has certainly made its mark, especially post-martial law. And I just wanted to, you took over. Precisely when? When did you take over as publisher?
Roughly half a year ago.
Half a year ago.
From the late Isagani Yambot,
yeah,
sadly, who was a publisher for more than 2 decades.
Oh yeah, that's sad. Sad UCA is an institution. Now,
yes.
I wanted to ask you briefly, before we go to the whole industry of the newspaper industry, I wanted to ask you about the role of a publisher, because as we actually prepared for this interview, we noticed that the other newspapers don't have a publisher. They normally have an editorial board, or the head of an editorial board. You, Inquirer retains a publisher. Can you just tell us quickly what your role is?
Okay, the Inquirer takes pride in being a highly professional news organization by world-class standards.
Yes.
And if you look at comparable newspapers abroad, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they all have publishers. And the office evolved because in a news organization, there is the editorial side,
right.
There is the business side. Both sides independent of the other, but by the nature of the work necessarily would have to work together.
Yeah.
And it is the publisher who, in that tradition, theoretically sort of like bridges.
Puts it all together between the
yes.
management and editorial.
Yes, of course, that is the big theory and the big history. We transplant that to the Philippines, and exactly as you say, the other newspapers don't bother to have a publisher. So having a publisher is part of the Inquirer's commitment to maintaining that standard of independence between the different aspects of a newspaper's life.
Now, you've been mostly in the academe, right? You're a renowned legal practitioner.
Well,
and
you're too kind, but thank you very much.
Almost legendary. I was going through your credentials, and I was totally blown away. You're part of the international criminal.
I took part
court.
in drafting the statute which created
the
international criminal.
So
court, yes.
what does this mean to you, coming from the I guess the legal side, the legal world, so to speak, and now being part of media, being a publisher? Is the transition difficult?
Well, perhaps we should exchange notes on this. Both of us being lawyers, and now, trained also as lawyers, having worked as lawyers, and now shifting to an entirely different world. So I'll start with that. It's an entirely different world.
Yes.
From the world of professors, from the world of lawyers. But there are similarities, Rod. The Inquirer has an elaborate code of ethics for its journalists, for its editors. The ethics are spelled out in our own, we call it the Blue Book.
Right.
We have rules for enforcing these ethics. And in many ways, what I see in the day-to-day work of my colleagues in the Inquirer, the challenge of living by these rules in real life,
right.
And that is, I think, a challenge that is faced by lawyers.
We do have ethical standards, supposedly. We do have ethics. I mean, lawyers
for lawyers, yes. But for the Inquirer, it is in fact published as a formal Blue Book,
right.
And which every journalist within the organization is sworn to uphold.
To some extent, it's probably tougher on your end because, well, everyone has access to their daily copy of Philippine Daily Inquirer. Not everyone has access to pleadings in court. So Inquirer basically and just like all other newspapers, face its jurors,
yes,
which is the
exactly.
which is the reading public, right?
Well, I'm glad you put it that way. Yes, we are judged by several 100,000 jurors every day, and that is just for the print version. For the online version, it multiplies several times more. These jurors judge us by different standards, different expectations, and also changing expectations over time.
Right.
But yes, that is a real challenge.
Now let's go to the business side of things. Of course, we mentioned Inquirer's #1, and this has been claimed and verified. When you say #1, though,
yes.
Can you elaborate on where you're #1? Is it advertising? Is it circulation? Or it's both?
Well, I'm familiar with circulation.
Yeah.
That is my chief concern. Yes, we are #1 in circulation, and that is just for the print version.
And that's confirmed by independent groups.
That is, yes, several times over. So, but we also have a very strong online presence. And I'm proud to say that the Inquirer has, over the years, been preparing to meet this challenge that the print journalism eventually being overtaken by the internet, by social media,
by the digital versions,
by both the digital version and also alternative sources of news for people. That perhaps at some point in the future, the idea of opening a newspaper in the morning might be, for the next generations anyway.
Yeah. I always wanted the smell of paper, though. I always wanted that crisp smell.
Exactly.
There's something different with this than holding a tablet.
Yes, but maybe that's, Rod, that's also generational.
I know.
Maybe
I know.
For the kids who grew up on tablets, on iPads, the first thing they do might be to tap.
Check, yeah, but it's also real time, right? I mean, sometimes what is your deadline for coming up with a bit of news for it to be printed the next day? It's probably, I don't know, 10 in the evening or 11 in the evening. Whereas if something happens between 10 to 4 before the physical paper comes out, it wouldn't be in the paper, right? That's a challenge there.
In fact, the Inquirer has confronted that in many of our training seminars, where we exchange notes among ourselves, exchange notes from abroad as well. With today's technology, if the value is the speed of getting the news, nothing can beat online.
Right.
Nothing can beat the social networks. So the value of the newspaper in that context will also have to change.
Right.
It's not a race to deliver the news. In that race, the tweeters will beat everyone.
Always be ahead, right?
Yes. We're talking a time span of 10-15 minutes. The news cycle for the print is 1 day.
Right.
So the value of the print medium would be to give context, to give depth, to give perspective.
Right.
And that is something that the social media, the tweeters, are not equipped to do.
Right. They'll only come up with the headline probably, and and there's that much analysis and that much depth.
That is correct. So the good old-fashioned journalism has its strength in the context and depth.
Yeah. Now, Dean Raul, you're #1. How do you see, what are the challenges for you moving forward? Obviously, when you're #1, I guess you're looking at your back. but what are your biggest challenges now? Is it more on the editorial side? Is it more on the advertising side? Is it more on the readership side? Or is it this new media that you're talking about?
Well, as #1, we look forward. And looking forward means precisely preparing for the digital age,
which you said is inevitable. It's
yes, it is. We're almost there, and preparing both the. And I have seen all the preparations of the Inquirer for this. In terms of manpower, in terms of skills trainings, in terms of the organization, on how to make the most of the of the new technology, and also the new audiences that the technology bring in.
That's right.
As I've mentioned earlier, there is a generational line there for those who prefer good old-fashioned print, and for those who are more comfortable reading the whole thing online, and yet another group for those who prefer to read them in snippets in terms of likes and shares on Facebook and social media. So it is in identifying those audiences, identifying the way by which they read and appreciate the facts as they happen. That is the
biggest challenge.
The
main
for you. Challenge.
Yeah.
Yes.
So and Inquirer is in the forefront, as you mentioned. We do know that, of course, you have the physical paper, and then you now have your digital online version, right?
Yes.
Now your online version is it page for page exactly like the hard copy?
Yes. Well, it's okay. We have the online copy, which is like a digital replica of exactly what you see. Yeah. What you see. And when I speak to people, you'd be surprised. What they like is that they see all the ads.
Yeah.
Because the ads are the ones missing in the we call it the .NET version.
Yeah. I'm sure your advertisers like that as well.
Oh yes, and that is actually an added value to the advertising that they paid for the print version, and which is multiplied, hundreds of times over in the online version. We also have the .NET version, the one which is accessed for free, and which I see also as a way by which because of the diaspora, Filipinos spread all over the world.
That's right. Yeah.
The way by which they keep our countrymen abroad keep track of what is.
Yeah, but I'm assuming that the digital part is either gaining or probably even more. No?
Yes. Well, what I'm aware of is that the readership of the digital copy is actually closely monitored, and I was actually impressed with the sophisticated software by which we can monitor the hits, the unique readers, and keep track of the readership of our news and our columnists.
Great. Well, we need to take a short break, Dean Pangalangan, but when we get back, we're going to be talking. I'm going to ask you about your thoughts on quasi-journalists, bloggers, and how they impact on the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Yes. We're talking to Dean Pangalangan of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. We'll be right back. Please don't go away. You're still watching News Cafe on the Solar News channel, and we are still joined by our guest, Dean Raul Pangalangan, publisher of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Now, we were talking about the state of Philippine Daily Inquirer and, of course, journalism and the newspaper business. But let's take a few steps back. How did you start in writing your column? Now, your very famous column now.
Well, Rod, as you mentioned earlier, I am by training a lawyer. I was a law professor.
Yeah.
And then one fine morning in 2004, I got this phone call from the Philippine Daily Inquirer, inviting me to be a columnist. And on the spot, I accepted the invitation.
Was there a particular, did you ask, what do I write about? Or they just gave you free rein?
I asked them that, and they gave me free rein. Because I thought at first that I was being invited to write mainly about legal matters. And then I was told, when I eventually met with Mr. Yambot, with Gani, that no, I was free to choose my topics. So I visited the offices of the Philippine Daily Inquirer, and soon after the elections of 2004, I published my first column, and I can tell you that I would write it much differently today.
I know. As a writer myself, I look back at my old articles, and and I want to cringe, and I wish I was able to review it. We all know that with social media now, you know, there's been a growth of number of bloggers. Yes. Some of them are legit; they're really good bloggers. Some of them are really, I have to say, just quasi writers or quasi bloggers. No? And the thing there is that most people who just check online and just do a Google search will then be led to maybe to some of these quasi writers who may not be subject to the same ethical standards as journalists in the Inquirer. What are your thoughts on that? First off, and secondly, does the Inquirer? What are the thoughts of Inquirer as a company on these bloggers? Do you make reference to them, to their work, or what they have to say?
Okay, let us start with the again, the classic rules for journalists were written on the assumption of print journalism, eventually of broadcast journalism, but both of which have a common factor. These are organized institutions with editors to make sure that there is nothing defamatory, that there is balance, that there is fairness, that both sides are heard. Now, suddenly we are called upon to apply the same rules in an entirely different context. Bloggers who don't report to any editor and who can actually broadcast their messages to the world. In other words, to exercise the same power but without the old constraints.
Right.
Now, the established wisdom that I hear is that the market will take care of itself. That a blogger, in order indeed to reach that wide audience, would have a following, would need a following, and would have to establish his credibility with that to earn that following. And therefore, merely broadcasting a message will not by itself reach that wide an audience. So if you compare that then to traditional journalism, yes, it is a problem that the new media, that the new technologies would basically release a whole new segment of communications.
Some of the critics would say that newspapers try to sell more paper by trying to sensationalize the news. And to some extent, there's a little bit of a marketing involved, to kind of a pull on the headline. And there's, in fact, there are people who say that good news doesn't sell and bad news sells, and therefore you kind of sensationalize the bad news. And if there's a particular showbiz story that's coming out, let's put that in the headline. Is that something, one, you get involved with as publisher, and two, what are your thoughts on that, and trying to obviously spin the headlines to make it a little bit more sensational?
Well, let me just start on the common impression that newspapers prefer bad news. If you see our wallpaper, we call the big photograph. As a matter of policy,
in fact, we can hold it up.
Yes, as a matter of policy, we combine features like this nature shot with hard news in other issues. In other words, it's not as if the big photograph is for the bad and dreary news. No, we
you balance it out with some of the good stuff.
We are happy to highlight good news or the lighter side of life. Now, in terms of spicing up the headings, for me, that's a legitimate part of the game. You see, it's not that the newspaper has to sell, but of course it does have to sell. But you see, it has to be read, and one has to draw the reader to read an article, a newspaper. And if one has to spice up the
headline or
the captions, the headlines, the headings, then for me it's a legitimate part of reporting. Because then you've got the hard facts in the body, but to get to the body, you've got to entice the reader to read it.
Now, do you check on some of your writers? Sometimes, for example, news articles, not the opinion pages, not the editorial, but in the main body itself, when where newspaper reporters are reporting the facts, the who, what, where, when,
yes,
and why. Do you sometimes welcome a little bit of opinion there, or you just put that in the editorial part?
We put that in the editorial part, yes. In the opinion pages are for opinion. The news pages are for news, and we monitor that closely.
All right. Now going back to PDI, what are some of the guiding principles that it has followed that has led to it being #1, and what moving forward, what new guiding principles are you bringing in to ensure that it remains #1?
Yes, you know, in the history of the Philippine Daily Inquirer, going back to EDSA 1, the real test was faced by the newspaper during the advertisers' boycott under President Estrada.
Okay.
And, during which a sitting president tried to bring down a newspaper for its critical coverage, and the advertisers cooperated with the president, and the Inquirer did not buckle down. But the pressure was very intense, on the newspaper, and both the business side and the editorial sides of the newspaper.
So basically, uncompromising,
work together to stand up to the president, and the newspaper prevailed. So for me, given that history, and having survived and thrived since, I think the values of the paper should be unmistakable to the reader, that this paper is independent and it will stand up to any challenge.
Now, we were talking about, going back again to the technology part, you were mentioning something about this icon.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about this icon?
Yes, this is the INQ Snap, the Ink Snap. If you have, let me start with the basics. If you have a smartphone, you can just download the Ink Snap app, point it to this, and as soon as you do that, there would be a cascade of links. If it is, let us say, if it is a basketball game, there will be links to video clips of the game itself. There would be links to the stats of the rankings of these teams. There would be links to interviews by the coaches, by the players, both for this game and relevant.
So basically, using your mobile phone.
That is correct.
Capture it, and then you get links to all these Inquirer articles.
That is correct. Yeah. So, in other words, the newspaper starts off with the information about the news item, the report. But with the help of this new technology, the reader who's wondering about maybe they would like the video clip of this the most exciting part of the game. Those clips will be there in that in the links that will be offered, and it is also a way by which to marry the different sides. We call them the platforms, both the print and the digital platforms.
Fantastic.
And also to give the reader access to photographs. If our photographers, for instance, took many beautiful photographs of an event, and of course we can just use a few of them in the print version. They will find the unused, the director's cut of the photographs through the Ink Snap.
Great. Now we're talking about guiding principles. We're running out of time, so I'm going to throw this question in. You were talking about guiding principles, what makes Inquirer #1, and how you what principles you plan to instill to continue to have Inquirer being #1. What are some of the bad things that have happened? Not in your case, maybe perhaps with other newspapers that you try to avoid and to make sure that it will not happen in the Inquirer. Are there things that pop in your mind that you there are some practices that some newspapers have done that you will not get into, for sure?
Let me just state for myself. The one thing that I think newspapers have to guard against at this stage in our history, post EDSA 1, post EDSA 2, is that the newspapers must be aware that there are political forces out there, that the real master of the newspaper is its reading public, and it must be vigilant in making sure that it serves that public and not any political group. But if I may just, I would like to close on the brighter side, Rod. I'm very proud to say that when the new Pope was selected, it was only the Philippine Daily Inquirer that carried the news that day.
Okay.
So the Pope was selected around 2 o'clock in the morning.
And you had it in your headline.
It was only the Inquirer editor-in-chief who was awake at that time, ready to come out with a new edition of the paper to report it.
Well, there's a classic example of being on their toes.
Yes, and we're very proud of that.
Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for tonight. I would like to thank our guest, Dean Raul Pangalangan, for being with us today in this one-on-one interview. Join us again next Thursday for another round of discussion right here on News Cafe. I'm Attorney Rod De Pomoceno. Salamat and God bless. Thank you, sir.